J'ouvre maintenant la séance.
I now call the meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 44 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Official Languages. Pursuant to the order of reference of Monday, May 30th, 2022, the committee resumes consideration of Bill C-13, an act to amend the Official Languages Act to enact an act respecting the use of French within the federal private sector and to make related amendments to other acts. In accordance with our routine motion, we will be resuming our debate on C-13. And I've already said this is an act respecting the use of French within the federal private sector. I would like to inform the committee that all witnesses have done sound checks, except for the video. Has that been done? Yes, it has. Good. So I would now like to welcome our witnesses, Mr. Pablo Rodriguez, Ms. Petitpas-Taylor. Thank you very much for coming here, and I'd like to welcome you all. As you know, we give our witnesses 5 minutes to make their presentations, and then we turn to the questions for new people who I would like to say that I'm very strict about time because we'll have a lot of questions. So I think the Minister, on a point of order, go ahead, Mr. Gaudin. Mr. Chair, I'd like to understand the process better. Last evening at 5:30, we received a notice of meeting saying that that Minister Rodriguez and Minister Petitpas-Taylor would be there from 11 till 12, and that the second hour would be for the officials of the department. And at 8:45 this morning, this was amended. Could you please explain what happened between 5:30 p.m. yesterday and 8:45 this morning? Why was the notice of meeting changed? That's my first point. I have others as well. For the notice of appearance this morning, I think it was clear. Thank you, Madam Chair. Mrs. Petitpas-Taylor is available for 2 hours. So we amended the notice to indicate she'd be here for 2 hours. Mr. Rodriguez will be here for 1 hour. So, Mr. Chair, so what I can understand from this motion, we have insisted that the Minister of Canadian Heritage come. We've asked him several times. We see he is here today, but if I read the motion that we adopted unanimously, we had called for 2 sessions for each minister. And the way I read it and interpret this motion is that Mr. Rodriguez should testify by himself for the first hour with his department officials, and Ms. Petitpas-Taylor should be appearing 1 hour by herself with her employees. Have I understood this correctly? Literally speaking, yes, but if we have a bonus here, Ms. Petitpas-Taylor will be here for 2 hours. That's a bonus, no? So the change was made to the notice simply because she was going to be here for 2 hours. But if you want to put your questions to Mr. Rodriguez during the first hour, can we choose to have Ms. Rodriguez for 2 hours rather than Ms. Petitpas-Taylor? Point of order. In all honesty, we have the minister here for 2 hours. So that's on top of what was called for in the motion. I hope we're not to continue with this obstruction so that we can get to the witnesses. One moment. Please, everyone around the table. Cacophony is not going to make things go faster. Mr. Gaudin, I understand what you're saying, but I don't see what the problem is. And Mr. Rodriguez is here for the first hour. So at that point, Mr. Rodriguez will answer questions during the first hour, and we shouldn't ask questions of Ms. Petitpas-Taylor. If you want to do it that way, you're free to do so. But the motion was clear. 1 hour, 1 complete hour for each minister. Why are both of them appearing at the same time? Treasury Board and Immigration appeared separately. So everybody should have 1 hour exclusively. I heard what you said, but again, I don't understand what would take away from any member's rights by under this motion that you've just quoted. Yes, Mr. Boilier. We said 1 minister for each hour. Is it because Mr. Rodriguez wasn't able to answer beforehand? You have to put that question to Minister Rodriguez. I received the same notice of meeting as you did. There's 1 minister responsible for official language. That is Minister of Official Languages. We have a point of order before us right now. Yes, but Mr. Yes, go ahead. I'll listen. What's the motion? We have to apply the motion. If not, we'll vote on it. The committee is free to do as it sees fits, but the time is going ahead. Time is going by. The minister is here for a full hour. Are you suggesting that Minister Petitpas-Taylor should leave the room for an hour so that Minister Rodriguez can testify? Well, the motion says that each minister will have 1 full hour, so I want 1 hour with the Minister of Canadian Heritage and 1 hour with the Minister for Official Languages. I'm just referring to the motion. On a point of clarification, the Minister of Canadian Heritage is right there. I recognize him. He's sitting right there. So we're wasting time. You can continue with your questions, but I see he's there. I can point him out with my finger. I'm pointing at him right now. This is Minister Rodriguez. He's here. If I may, the motion is a framework for the work. We adopted it unanimously, but we can't. Committees cannot control how witnesses are to appear. We ask the witnesses to come here. They're here. It's up to you to decide whether you want to address your questions to 1 minister during the first hour. Mr. Rodriguez is here for just 1 hour, and time is flying by. So you've referred to this motion. I think out of respect, I think we should ask questions of the witnesses. We've been waiting to hear from them for a long time. My colleague is saying that I'm wasting time, so I'm not going to be blamed by my colleagues. Go proceed, and we will be, in my opinion, I think we should be putting our questions to Mr. Rodriguez, and during the second hour, it will be for officials' language. So, not questions. First of all, Mr. Rodriguez, you have 5 minutes. Please go ahead with your opening statement. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for your invitation. You know, the bill that you're studying today is not only a priority for our government, it is, in my humble opinion, essential for the future of French throughout Canada and including Quebec. At the outset, I'd like to, and this is something that you know, that the responsibility for official languages lies with my colleague and that I play no role in the development or overall coordination of the Official Languages Act. That said, as Quebec's lieutenant for our government, this bill is of particular importance to me professionally and personally. When I came here as an immigrant, I didn't speak any English or French, just Spanish. And it was by learning our 2 languages that I discovered the richness of Canada's cultures, what we were all about as a nation. It was, first of all, through French that I came to love our songs, our films, our culture, that I developed my sense of belonging to Quebec and to Canada. And you know, like many Francophones, I'm concerned about the future of my language, and I'm not the only one. We know that we need strong action to ensure the vitality of French, and Bill C-13, put forward by my colleague, is based on a fundamental principle, and that is the French language is under threat everywhere in the country, including Quebec. There are 8 million Francophones in Canada and a sea of over 360 million Anglophones. In North America, French is fragile. French is a minority language in our country and as well on our continent. So let's be clear, inaction is not an option. The status quo is not the plan. For the first time, we are recognizing that French and English cannot be treated equally when it comes to protecting them. So our government, therefore, intends to assume its full responsibilities in this regard in accordance with its jurisdiction. So I think everyone should recognize that Bill C-13 represents a major step forward for Francophone communities in Canada. And let's be clear, Mr. Chair. At the same time that we're going to do more to protect French, we will continue to protect the rights of linguistic minorities, and that includes English-speaking Quebecers because a Quebecer, Mr. Chair, a Quebecer is a Quebecer. And what C-13 proposes is not something we just pulled out of our hat. Quite the opposite. It's based on numerous consultations across the country that have allowed the government to introduce a comprehensive bill that proposes concrete solutions on several fronts. These are major steps forward. For example, in private businesses under federal jurisdiction, the right of consumers to be served in French and the right to work in French are recognized and regulated. And this is in Quebec and in communities with a strong Francophone presence. And this is essential that we do that. Moreover, we have an obligation to have a Francophone immigration policy. And in this regard, my colleague, the Minister of Immigration, has great ambitions and will give himself the tools he needs to achieve them. So we're giving the official language commissioner more teeth. And these are just but a few examples that I would like to give you. And I would like to conclude by saying that the future of French lies with all of us. We share this responsibility with our provincial counterparts, particularly the government of Quebec. You know, we don't always agree on the means, but we definitely do share the same objective. So we will continue, yes, to listen, but we will also take action. And we're not going to shirk our responsibility. C-13 contains strong measures that apply to the whole country and that respect our jurisdiction. So I'm therefore asking you, dear colleague, to work together to move this bill forward as it is of great importance in Quebec and throughout Canada. Francophones across the country are eagerly waiting for this for reform. So are Canadians. So thank you, and I'd be pleased to answer any questions.
La première ronde de questions.
So the first round of questions will be questions of 6 minutes each, and we'll begin with the first vice chair of the committee, Mr. Joël Godin. You have the floor for 6 minutes, Mr. Godin. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And indeed, Mr. Rodriguez, we have the same objective, which is to work to have the best means to protect bilingualism in Canada. And I say bilingualism, French and English. I think it's important to distinguish the two languages that underlie our bilingualism, because some things that your government has done are dubious. As an example, the appointment of the Governor General, who's bilingual but who doesn't speak French. So, Mr. Rodriguez, you said in your speech that you consulted and that C-13 is there to improve French, amongst other things. And I don't know if you consulted, as an example, the FCFA. The FCFA is asking that C-13 provide that the central agency be under Treasury Board. So I'd like to hear you on that, Mr. Rodriguez. Well, if you're asking questions about the bill and the consultations, they were carried out by my colleague, who is the Minister of Official Languages and works with that team. If you have any questions regarding Canadian heritage, I'm there for that. Absolutely, we want to strengthen both official languages, but with respect for minorities. That's part of the mandate. Well, you'll understand that in the bill, there's no mention of the Minister of Official Languages. The distribution of power is done under Heritage Canada, or maybe you don't know this, you have the responsibility, as well as Treasury Board. So Canadian Heritage and Treasury Board. The Minister of Official Languages doesn't even appear in the bill. It's you who have the responsibility. So I'd like to hear what you have to say on the sharing of power between Canadian Heritage, your current department, and Treasury Board. What is your vision in that regard? Do you accept that there is a sharing of power between those two departments? Well, the responsibilities for official languages were transferred by the Minister of Canadian Heritage to the Minister of Official Languages. That is official. Well, yes, by decree, by order in council, but you are the person holding the portfolio of Canadian Heritage right now. Inaudible. I'm sorry, Mr. Godin. Mr. Rodriguez, in fact, you are shirking this because Canadian Heritage is identified in the bill. What I understand is that the Minister of Official Languages, by order in council of your department, you are transferring the power to be your representative to her. But that doesn't come under the Department of Official Languages. It doesn't exist. It's Canadian Heritage that has the responsibility. So at that point in time, what I'm hearing, the Minister, with all due respect, what I'm hearing is that it's not you who has the control and it's not the Minister of Official Languages. So why not accept sending all powers to the Treasury Board? I don't agree. She's not a representative. She is the Minister by title of official languages. She has all the powers that comes with that, and she has all the responsibilities of her department. So once again, if you have questions that deal with the Department of Canadian Heritage, I will answer. Why do the Conservatives continue to filibuster this bill? Mr. Chairman, just a moment, please. Mr. Rodriguez, you know how committees function. The questions come from the committee. And I would ask you, with all due respect, to answer my colleagues' questions. Whether or not the questions are relevant, and I'm not saying that they aren't, but regardless of what the quality of the question is, I would ask you respectfully to answer them. Because the clock is ticking away. I'll go back to Mr. Godin. I have a question, says Mr. Rodriguez. Mr. Chairman, do I have the floor? Do you want to answer my question? Yes, you must answer the question. This is an interactive exchange. It's 6 minutes. You don't have 6 minutes. I'm trying to answer his question. I just said it wasn't very relevant. Well, that's your opinion, Mr. Rodriguez. The interpreter regrets, but if there are too many people speaking at the same time,
demander à M. Rodriguez de respecter la discipline autour de cette.
Please respect the discipline around this table. We've always managed to do this with the former minister. I don't know why he has that attitude. My question is very clear, Mr. Rodriguez. I want to know, in terms of power, if there's any confusion between yourself and Ms. Petitpas-Taylor. Would it not be better, in the interest of francophones, to give the full power to the Treasury Board? My question is clear. Whether it's relevant or not in your opinion is not important. I'm asking you to answer. I'm a member of Parliament, and I'm asking the Minister of Canadian Heritage to answer my question. Thank you very much. I'd be very pleased to answer you, Mr. Godin. Now, Ms. Petitpas-Taylor is doing extraordinary job. She's the one who's doing the job. She's doing extraordinary work. Mr. Chairman, I'm come back to the same question. After these consultations, does the Minister of Official Languages, did she give you the information of these consultations? Because one of the first requests of the FCFA, who represent a huge number of minority language communities, they want to have the power concentrated at the Treasury Board. Did she send her that information? Because you have it under this legislation. So do you agree with the fact that we're going to amend in the interest of francophones in order to allow Treasury Board to have full power? You've asked the same question 3 times, and I've said already, Mr. Godin, the responsibility is under the Minister of Official Languages. My question, in conclusion, you haven't been in power for a long time, says Mr. Rodriguez. Mr. Chairman, what the witness just said is of no importance. What I want to know is, does the Minister of Canadian Heritage work for the Official Languages Act? I work in cooperation with the Minister of Official Languages. Well, what do you... through my department, support the cultural sector. I support our creators and artists, and what you have tried to block through C11, and when you talk to journalists, that's what you're doing, Mr. Godin. So you assume your responsibilities. I assume that very clearly as an opposition party, but all of the organizations in Canada want the transfer of power to be centralized under the Treasury Board of Canada. So assume that. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. The 6 minutes is up. Point of order, please, Mr. I'll begin with Mr. Drouin and then Mr. Iacono. I know that we have excellent technical services and that the microphones work very well. If you have difficulty hearing, I suggest the members use their earpieces because it works very well. It's a small room, and I need earplugs in here. This volume is so loud. Well, that's a good intervention, Mr. Drouin, but it's for the interpreters that I'm speaking now. I don't know how they're managing to translate all of this or interpret all of this. So please, respect the back and forth of question and answer, and don't answer at the same time. Mr. Iacono, I'm listening to you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's in the same vein that I wish to make a comment. I think that our colleagues have every right to ask questions, but they have to leave time to the minister to respond, and also to allow the minister free to answer the questions and not insult or categorize their responses because they don't agree with it. So I think on both sides we need to have respect shown, and it's important that we be able to understand who's speaking and who's answering. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Just a moment, please. Before we go any further on this, Mr. Godin, go ahead. Mr. Chairman, what my colleague just mentioned is that I did not insult the minister. I just used the same terms that he did, so you'll have to judge the interpretation of that clearly. Well, the public is free to interpret and make a judgment on that. I would say that not often doing this I make this mistake rather as the chair, but I forgot to let Ms. Petitpas-Taylor make her presentation. So I will allow you to go ahead with your presentation. Well, I think that it'll be part of the second hour. So I think it's necessary that we hear from her then. Yes, but the agenda says that the 2 ministers appear at the same time, and the first hour is for Mr. Rodriguez. Well, the problem, Mr. Chairman, is that it cuts into the first hour. So I suggest that you don't do that. Well, I see that the minister is comfortable with that. So, Madam Minister. I was doing it out of respect for the agenda that we received, but the minister is telling me that she agrees with it entirely. So go ahead. Further information, yes, we have to respect the agenda, but above all, we have to respect the motion that was adopted unanimously here. Well, except that I repeat that we cannot control how witnesses appear. So having said that, the time is fleeing, and the next turn is Ms. Kayabaga for 6 minutes. She has the floor for 6 minutes. Go ahead, Ms. Kayabaga. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Good morning, ministers. And I would like to address the minister who is in charge of the Official Languages Committee. And I apologize for this beginning. We got off on the wrong foot because we're very interested in speaking to the minister who's responsible for the francophonie in Canada. This is a problem that was raised by everyone, and particularly by our communities who are minority communities. So, Madam Minister, I'd like to ask, first of all, we know that there are a lot of people who are very much hoping that we'll agree on C-13 today. Can you speak to us today about that, and especially about our counterparts who will be responsible. So in my community, for example, we are really looking forward to things moving forward. First of all, for those who know me, you know that I'm an Acadian from New Brunswick. You can hear it through my accent. And I live in an official language minority community. For me, I've had the opportunity to live in French, to work in French, and to study, study in French. So for me, this is a bill that I hold near and dear to my heart. This is something that will make a real difference in our lives. Over the last year, I had the privilege to meet with my counterparts from across the country, and I had my first meeting between the federal, the government, provinces and territories, and I had the opportunity to talk about all these issues. We look forward to working closely together in the future. For the implementation or the development of C-13, I think we also have to say that the work started 4 years ago. We're talking about documents concerning the reform. There was C-32 in the past, and now with C-13 we can see that we are going to have a good version of this, and it's a bill that has teeth. Thanks to these conversations that we had with our counterparts, we are here today with a good bill. And finally, being a new Minister for Official Languages, over the last year I've had the opportunity to meet with stakeholders from across the country, to get to know them, to build relationships, and also to take the time to talk about their perspectives and what they wanted to see in this bill. Clearly, Bill C-32 had good points, but we also heard from stakeholders who wanted to hear improvements to it, and that's exactly what we've done with Bill C-13. Minister, you mentioned that you're Acadian, so you're aware of the fact, you're aware of the situation that's happening in your region with your premier, who is not moving the education in French file forward. And so can you make some comments on that in New Brunswick? Yes, thank you very much, Ariel. Clearly, as the Minister of Official Languages, when people learn that I come from New Brunswick, often the first thing they say, first of all, we're the only bilingual province, officially bilingual province in Canada, and people watch what happens in our province. Over the last few years, official languages minority language communities are facing challenges, and very specific challenges. We have a government this time around that is not sensitive to Francophones in New Brunswick, first of all, the provincial government, and secondly, we can see that the Premier in question appointed a minister on the review of the Official Languages Act for the thing. This minister has never really defended them, official languages, and he talked about our health system last year, and also he spoke about the Commissioner of Official Languages, and he made comments that were not appropriate. So we can see that rights in New Brunswick at this point in time feel threatened. People feel threatened, and lately it really has been an insult to Francophones.
We wrote a letter to Minister Higgs stating our concern. We said that this minister shouldn't be sitting on the Official Languages Committee. 6 MPs from New Brunswick signed this letter. We sent this letter to all New Brunswick members of Parliament, and only 4 members from members of the provincial legislature in New Brunswick decided not to sign this letter. So we continue to work on this file. Thank you for your answers. Do you wish to answer a question about the division of power? I was a little bit insulted to say that I was a representative. I was appointed Minister for Official Languages, and the delegation of power was done by the Prime Minister. So this file is under my purview. Yes, it does come under the purview of Canadian Heritage, but the whole issue of the Act comes under my purview. Thank you very much for explaining this. It's important that we understand. And I apologize for the insult. We want to ensure that this bill goes further. We live in communities that are declining. I don't think I have much time remaining, but I'd like to thank you very much for appearing, and I would also like to thank the Minister of Canadian Heritage for appearing. Thank you very much, Mrs. Kaya-Bega. The next question will come from Mr. Beaulieu. You have 6 minutes. I find it most unfortunate that you don't respect the spirit of the motion that we voted on, but I won't lose any more time on that. I have a question for Minister Rodriguez. The government of Quebec had one question that underpinned negotiations, and it said that only the French was threatened, and you don't accept that. You're saying that Anglophones are the minority in Quebec, and you talked about Part 7, for which you're responsible, is just it is funded. It is there to fund the Anglophone community. So what exactly is going to change with C-13? Well, I don't understand what you mean, because we have to agree that in Quebec, the Anglophones are in the minority. Well, it's as if the majority in English Canada is saying, well, we must understand that the Anglophones were the elite right from the outset. You don't acknowledge the fact that the Anglophones are in a minority situation, numerically perhaps, and the Official Languages Act deals with the minorities everywhere, including the French-speaking minorities outside Quebec. French was declining outside of Quebec. And so here we're ensuring that Francophone workers can work in French and that service can be provided in French in federally regulated businesses. Well, we know that Part 7, there are subsidies that are grants given out under Part 7 in Quebec, and it goes exclusively to promote English as official language, to support the Anglophone community. What's going to change with this new bill? The bill. If you have a specific question, you should address this question to the minister. You're simply diverting, and that's you don't accept any of Quebec's demands. You accept a general principle. You recognize that French is in decline, and this is scandalous. You've recognized that this is the case for the past 2 years. Bravo, but you haven't taken any action. And you talked about the language of work. Unanimously in Quebec, all former premiers, even Liberal premiers, unions, have all wanted to implement the French language charter. But C-13 is going to is going to stop giving this choice to businesses. And I don't understand this. And you've often repeated, and I asked this question of Minister Petitpas-Taylor. She said that we are now instituting a right. Bravo. We've been asking for this for 50 years. But you've often said that C-13 is like Bill 101 for business. That's not true at all. It's false information, because our bill makes French the common languages, and that's not the case with this one. Look at signage. There is no predominance of French. There is no... You have the right to work in French, but you defend the right to work in English. So we're not talking about the same thing here. So you don't accept the demands put forward by the Quebec government. I work very well with the government of Quebec. You always say this, Mr. Chair, there's a lack of respect here. And I would like to answer the question. We have reached agreements on housing, on internet, training of manpower, homelessness. $2.5 billion was invested for $2.5 million for Saint Jean Baptiste. So this adds to what the government has, and we've been able to cooperate with the government of Quebec, and that includes the language file, Mr. Beaulieu. We don't always agree on the means, but we definitely agree on the objective. And we're talking here about the language of service and the language of work. You repeat this objective, but there's no means to attain this objective. I have another question. A lot of organizations financed by Canadian Heritage, West Quebecer, Townshippers, QC, and G, some of these organizations have said that the government is racist. You have less than 5 seconds. That's a personal attack. I never said. Your time is up, Mr. Beaulieu. We're not racist. Please direct your questions and answers through the chair. The next 6-minute round, Ms. Ashton will have the floor for 6 minutes. Please go ahead. Good morning, ministers. My first question is for Minister Rodriguez. You're the Quebec lieutenant. French is declining in Quebec. Quebecers are worried about seeing this deterioration. How do you intend to put a halt to this? We lost you briefly, Ms. Ashton. Please go back. What are you going to do to put an end to the decline of French in Quebec? You're going to be targeting the minority community in Quebec, but what are you going to do to defend French in Quebec? That's a very important question. As for details, I would refer to my colleague, Minister for Official Languages. But within this bill, I am not going to once again talk about details, but the whole issue of language of work and access to services. But beyond all of that, there is C11, which ensures that Netflix and others will have to participate in the development of content in French. There's C18. There is a whole suite of measures. This pertains to local, regional newspapers. Money will be directed to these groups, and we're going to develop French content in Quebec and outside of Quebec as well. So we have a whole suite of measures that will help. But unlike Mr. Beaulieu, I'm convinced that we can strengthen the French factor, and that's the big difference. My second question is the role of coordination, the role that Canadian Heritage will play with respect to these provisions. Why does Canadian Heritage just give directives to other departments and ask them to come up with directives, but they don't necessarily comply? And with respect to a specific official language files, Ms. Petitpas-Taylor can answer those questions. I have no role to play in that. it's my colleague who does this. She has a mandate letter to do this, but I do not concern myself with the official languages as far as that's concerned. But as I already understand, as I said earlier, that's a problem. All of the witnesses who have appeared have asked that this responsibility be centralized under the Treasury Board. And based on what the communities have been saying to us, this is a problem. There's a problem with the way things are done now. And C13 continues to give a lot of power to Heritage Canada. If you've never been able to fulfill the mandate up until now, do you think you'd be able to do it in the future? Once again, you're asking a specific question about official languages, Ms. Ashton. My colleague can answer that. She'd be happy to answer your questions, but I can tell you that Heritage has introduced a whole series of measures, C18, C11. We will enable firms to develop all kinds of projects in Quebec. Within Canadian Heritage, we can work to develop French both in Quebec and outside of Quebec. But for specific questions pertaining to official languages, my colleague can answer that. I appreciate your observation, except that what I would say is that this bill refers to your department, and as you said in your opening statement, the status quo isn't working. And we clearly heard from the communities that the status quo in term has the Canadian Heritage has not got enough teeth to fulfill its responsibilities, and I will ask similar questions of Minister for Official Languages later. Thank you very much.
Merci, Madame Ashton.
Thank you, Ms. Ashton. You have 30 seconds remaining. Thank you. The next round of questions will be 5-minute questions followed by 2.5 questions. We'll start with Mr. Dalton. You have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Do you believe that French is in decline in Canada? Yes. French is facing great challenges. I said earlier we are 8 million, and we don't have much time, so just yes or no. No, I just wanted a yes or no answer. Okay, I'll continue with my next question. Minister, I don't have much time. Mr. Rodriguez, please ask your questions of the chair. No, you don't want to answer. No, I said yes. We heard in the bill, we see lots of nice rhetoric that supports being offered to Francophones, but we heard from many witnesses that the bill doesn't go far enough to preserve French. Do you believe that C13 may be improved as a bill? Yes or no? I think that nothing's perfect in life, but I think it's a darn good bill, and it's up to the committee to look at that. The minister has done a great job. You have to look at the bill in an ecosystem. There are many other measures that come to strengthen the use of French, the protection and promotion of it. Thank you very much, Mr. Rodriguez. Are you open to amendments? Is that possible? I'm talking to you about the bill, but I can't respond on behalf of my colleague. Question. What are the implications of the budgetary costs on your department and on the budget? Do you have any idea of the budgetary impact of this bill? Well, you'd have to ask that of the minister responsible for it. Well, but ask the question of the person who's responsible. 30 seconds, Mr. Dalton. what we have seen here with the Liberal government is that we are investing and we don't see any results. So we don't just want to broaden or enlarge the bureaucracy. We want to see changes with impact. It's important. We saw that with immigration, for example, many more workers, but lowering of production. So it's worrisome. We want results, and what Canadians want is results on the front line. So, well, if you're really worried, stop filibustering. That's part of the answer. That the rest of the time is to Mr. Généreux. You have 2 minutes and 10 seconds. Yesterday in the show Sans Réserve, there was a guest who was at Qatar for the World Cup, and he said that a team player was introduced just in English, whereas the Belgian players were introduced in both of their official languages. So everywhere where the players are there, and for Switzerland and Italy, there are signs to say bienvenue in French. So even though there's a small percentage of Francophones in Italy, Canada has a much bigger delegations there, but it only says welcome. Minister, you're responsible for Canadian heritage, and these are things that are completely unacceptable, and we've seen this for 50 years here in Canada. My question is, under the current legislation, would this sort of thing still happen with the new bill that we have before us here? Well, once again, it's a specific question you can ask of my colleague. No, I'm not going to defend FIFA. I'm not here to do this. I'm not talking about FIFA. I'm talking about Canada. No, you're talking about the signs there and national anthems. I didn't talk about national anthems. Well, the way FIFA behaved is not acceptable. No. But congratulations to the Canadian team in passing. Minister, the question is the following. The version of the bill here hasn't prevented the decline over the last 50 years, and it hasn't prevented this sort of thing happening over 50 years. But for 50 years, we've been saying that we should be careful and really represent Canada well internationally in both official languages. And again, today, in 2022, we're almost in 2023. In a month's time, we're still seeing things happen like this. So who's going to say, oh, no, it's not my fault. Oh, talk to Treasury Board about that. No. All organizations who were presented, who appeared here as witnesses, even in your white paper you talked about this. The Minister Joly said that the Treasury Board should be responsible entirely for the enforcement of the First Official Languages Act. Thank you, Mr. Généreux. The next question for 5 minutes. Mr. Iacono, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the ministers for their presence here today. Madam Minister, I've often heard columnists or Francophone commentators in Quebec say that Bill C-13 doesn't go as far as C-32 did. Now, I don't have the impression that that's true, but I would like to give you the opportunity to answer that question. Thank you very much, Angelo, for that question. And yes, I also saw that in columns, but I have to say it's the exact opposite. With the development of C-13, we truly took up the principles of C-32, and that's indeed what we did. We also went even further. As I said earlier, I had the opportunity to meet with stakeholders from across the country in preparation for the tabling of C-13, and I heard their comments. They gave their comments on C-32, and they shared with me what the improvements were that they wanted to see, and that's exactly what we did. I could give you some examples, if I may, to increase the powers of the Commissioner of Official Languages. I met with Mr. Thiberge, and he said that he was looking for even more tools. So it was an issue of being able to set up and issue monetary penalties and administrative monetary penalties, and we want to ensure that he has the tools to do that work. Another thing is stakeholders told us that they wanted to have a better definition of positive measures. And once again, in the bill, we went further to ensure that we could have better definitions for the issue of positive measures, particularly in the regulatory framework. And the immigration policy, we can't forget that. One thing I know that I heard from one end of the country to the other is the whole issue of concerns about the loss of demographic weight. We had to ensure that immigration is a key to ensure that we can restore that demographic weight. So we really put an emphasis on that, and even more than in the past on Francophone immigration. Thank you. Minister, whereas the Liberal Party committed to having only bilingual judges at the Supreme Court of Canada, the Conservatives were always against this practice, and it's very disappointing because we think that all Canadians deserve to be able to be heard in the official language of their choice before the highest court in the country. Can you tell us a bit more about the way in which I have a point of order? I'm hearing you.
Not correctly state the policy of the Conservative Party. We don't need that partisanship here. We support a bilingual Supreme Court of Canada.
Monsieur Vice,
Mr. Vice, that's not a point of order.
No. Mr. Iacono is free to ask the question as he wants to ask the questions.
If the Liberals want to continue with their conneries.
Mr. Vice, je vous arrête tout de suite.
Mr. Vice, I'm holding you there, please. It's the first time in 7 years that sitting here that I've seen a meeting unfold in this way around the table. I'd ask everyone to be respectful and to follow procedure. I'll start the clock up again, Mr. Iacono, but just before I had Mr. Drouin. No, that's fine. Okay, so if there are no further points of order, I'll start the clock up again for Mr. Iacono. Okay, go ahead. Listen, I was interrupted in the middle of my question, which was very impolite, and I think that I should restart my question from the beginning so that the minister could clearly understand the question and respond. So I would like you to move put the clock back to the beginning. Mr. Iacono, I stopped the clock from the outset, so you had 2 minutes and 36 minutes. So I can start the question over from the beginning, but you have about 2.5 minutes. Go ahead. Well, I don't want to lose any of my time because he interrupted me, and the minister couldn't have understood my question. Yes, but Mr. Iacono, but what I'm saying is that as soon as that happened, I stopped the clock. So you can go ahead, Mr. Iacono. You have 2.5 minutes. Madam Minister, can you tell us a bit more about the way in which we are enshrining this principle in C-13? Could you repeat the question, Mr. Iacono? I'm sorry. Point of order, Mr. Chairman. So do you understand why I said that I should be able to restart my question from the beginning and that the clock should be backed up so that the minister could understand my question in its entirety? Okay, go ahead. I'll give you that extra room. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Madam Minister, whereas the Liberal Party committed to appointing bilingual judges to the Supreme Court of Canada, the Conservative Party has long been opposed to this practice. It is deeply disappointing because we believe that all Canadians deserve to be understood in the official language of their choice before the highest court in the land. Could you tell us a bit more about the way in which we are enshrining this principle in the bill C-13? Thank you very much, Mr. Iacono. First of all, since we've been in power, all appointments to the Supreme Court of Canada have been judges who are fully bilingual without needing interpretation. We recognize that access to justice is a fundamental right, and once again, we want to ensure that judges who's sitting on the highest court in Canada will be able to understand in the representations made in the language of the person's choice. So in order to support this, we have put it into Bill C-13 because we want to ensure that for the future governments, they will not be able to change that policy. For us, it's a fundamental right, and we want to ensure that it will continue. Mr. Chairman, do I have any time left? Excuse me? You have 1 minute. Thank you. Madam Minister, we heard the concerns of certain groups in Quebec, Anglophone groups, on the impact that this would have on their communities. How do you respond to these groups? And will they lose any rights under C-13 if it becomes law? Thank you very much for that important question. And once again, as my colleague said so well, we recognize that our official language minority communities include Anglophones in Quebec, as it does Francophones outside of Quebec. With C-13, as Mr. Justice Bastarache said during his testimony before the Senate committee, Bill C-13 will not take any rights away from the Anglophones of Quebec. Once again, we want to be sure that the regions with a strong Francophone presence outside of Quebec will be places where people can work in French and live in French, be served in French, and that will apply in Quebec as well. But once again, C-13 takes away no rights from Quebec Anglophones. Thank you very much, Madam Minister. We'll now go to a 2.5-minute round, starting with Mr. Mario Beaulieu. You have the floor for 2.5 minutes. Thank you. First of all, Mr. Rodriguez, can you talk about, speak out against the Anglophone groups who treat us as racists that you are financing? You're taking strange tangents here, Mr. Beaulieu. Honestly, I think that generally speaking in life, as in politics, you have to show openness. You have to reach out to people and not just point fingers at people. So really, what you're saying, I've said this to you before, Quebecers, we're not racist in Quebec. And you're accusing Quebecers of being racist? Well, whoever is accusing Quebecers, just a moment, please. It's impossible. It's impossible for the interpreters to continue. So, question, answer, and please address your answers to the chair. Mr. Beaulieu, I'll start the clock again. Okay, I'll ask another question. One of the demands or the requests of the government of Quebec is that with federal institutions, we know that 68% of jobs at the federal level in Quebec require the person to speak English for 9% of the population. So will something change with that in C-13? Well, you have to go and see what's happening in education. My colleague had a great meeting with the Minister Roberge, and that included discussions on language. Microphone, please. You're just responding with generalities and avoiding the question. And I'm wondering if that's why there were attempts to gag the committee, so to ensure that Quebecers will not realize that you're pulling a fast one on them in this bill. You don't speak on behalf of Quebecers. I didn't say that. I'm a Quebecer too. I didn't say otherwise, but I'm saying that you always respond with accusations, and that implies that we are intolerant. I'm not at all intolerant, but making French the common language is what we need to do in Quebec, including all Anglophones.
I consider myself as a Francophone, even though I didn't speak French when I first arrived. Do you intend to contribute in funding measures that anglicize Quebec? The next question is for Ms. Ashton, 2.5 minutes. Several witnesses have talked about the catastrophic state of French education in OLMCs outside of Quebec. Sometimes Francophones have to abandon their dream of being educated in French. But we need to facilitate the recruitment of French teachers abroad. How are you dealing with this situation? Thank you, Ms. Ashton. Once again, my colleague can answer the details, but you have made a good point about the importance of learning a language from an early age. And this is particularly important for Francophone communities outside of Quebec, having daycare centers where the language is French, because the Minister of Immigration, who appeared here this week, I didn't hear his testimony, but I know that he has a very ambitious vision for recruiting abroad to get more Francophone immigrants. The programs adapted to Quebec workers who are rare and perhaps inexistent. What are you going to do to ensure that all Quebecers, including newcomers, and can learn French? We're always going to be part of the solution, Ms. Ashton. Right now, the government of Quebec transfers $700 million for learning French. My colleague meets regularly with these groups, and I, too, speak to them, but we're always there to support Quebec with this measure. You still have 20 seconds remaining. I'd just like to underscore that these are the concerns of communities that were shared during various appearances, and we are hoping that we don't continue with the status quo. We need a stronger bill to really put an end to the decline of the French language, and that includes Francisization in Quebec and elsewhere in Canada. We all agree with that. Thank you, everyone. We're going to suspend for a few moments so that Mr. Rodriguez and his team can leave, and we will be now with the team and
La deuxième heure.
This is the second hour. So welcome once again to the Minister and welcome to your team. It's a pleasure to meet you once again, and welcome to Ms. Mondo, Ms. Boyer, and Ms. Boyer. And you can make a 5-minute statement, and then we'll turn to questions. Thank you very much. This is going to be very calm. Thank you very much for inviting me to appear today.
We are gathered on the traditional unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people. Depuis mon premier passage,
Since I last appeared before this committee in March, we have made a lot of progress. Last May, I began the Pan-Canadian consultations on the next action plan for official languages. They were held across the country and concluded at the Official Language Summit in Ottawa with nearly 300 stakeholders. During these 22 consultations, both virtual and face-to-face, more than 6,500 participants painted a complete picture of the community, the challenges they face, and the opportunities available to us. We will, moreover, be releasing the report on the action plan consultations in the next few days, which will highlight the key themes raised by communities during our discussion.
much hard work that is needed in order to move forward with our official languages action plan for 2023-2028, which will help put in place many ideas and initiatives that are at the centre of our modernization of our Official Languages Act. Bien que nous ayons fait du progrès,
while we have come a long way, I'm well aware that there is still a lot of work to do to meet our official languages objectives. Like you, I was very concerned by the 2021 census data released last August and again last week. With only 8 million Francophones in Canada living in a sea of more than 360 million Anglophones across North America, it is urgent that we act to restore our demographic weight. Because if we do nothing, the decline could get worse, and our government is committed to redoubling its efforts to prevent this from happening. So we need to work with our partners and the provinces and territories to put in place strategies that will allow us to reverse this trend. I sincerely believe that it is only by working together that we will be able to have a concrete impact in the years to come. The numbers released in 2021 census reiterate the importance of passing Bill C-13 now.
Frequently from communities across the country. Groups like la FCFA, LAFO, la SANB have told us that they want to see Bill C-13 adopted quickly because the federal government needs to play its part in supporting the official language minority communities across the country. Les attentes face à la modernité.
There are high expectations for the modernization and strengthening of our language regime, and with good reason. Whether it is strengthening the powers of the Commissioner of Official Languages, new rights to work and be served in French in private companies under federal jurisdiction, improving the compliance of federal institutions with respect to official languages, or even the adoption of a Francophone immigration policy.
With the tools we need to achieve these goals and to ensure both our official languages are supported. That is what we need to do, and that is why we need to adopt Bill C-13 without any further delay. Linda Cardinal, une voix avisée de la francophonie.
Linda Cardinal, a knowledgeable voice of the Canadian Francophonie, reminded the Standing Senate Committee on Official Languages that the longer we delay passing this bill, the more Francophones will pay the price. When you can't move forward, you don't tread water, you go backwards. As a proud Francophone and Acadian, I understand to what extent that this is a constant fight, and we can't pause for one instant to improve the plight of our official language minority communities.
The country and outside of Quebec. Monsieur le Président, j'aimerais rappeler que c'est
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to remind you that C-13 is the result of extensive consultations with our partners, the provincial and territorial governments, as well as with key stakeholders and institutions across the country over the past 4 years. We're therefore confident that the concrete measures proposed in the bill will reflect the needs of communities across the country. In the words of former Supreme Court of Canada Justice Bastarache, we have a bill that will dramatically improve the official languages situation in Canada.
Broader process of modernization that includes a number of administrative measures, associated regulations, and the upcoming action plan for official languages. But even after this bill is adopted, friends, our work continues. On devra définir qu'est-ce qu'une mesure positive.
We will have to define what is a positive measure and what is a region with a strong Francophone presence. This will require rigorous work and several consultations. So the objective is still the same, to adopt a relevant, promising, and strong bill for the benefit of all Canadians. I would like to take this opportunity to reiterate once again my sincere cooperation in making C-13 a reality. Thank you. I would now be pleased to answer your questions. Thank you, Minister. We will begin with a 6-minute question-answer period for each party. Mr. Godin, Vice Chair, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for coming here today. We all have the same objective.
We all have the same objective to strengthen French in Canada. You said that you carried out many consultations, and I think that's true. We saw your itinerary, and it was a very busy one. I'm sure you met with all these organizations. But, Madam Minister, I'd like to know, there was the white paper, there was C-32, there was the consultations carried out over the past year. Did you really hear what the language organizations and official language minority communities said? And I'll bring you directly to what the FCFA is asking for as an initial amendment, which is to have a single department responsible, a central agency responsible for the implementation of C-13, and it would be Treasury Board. So do you agree with that request of the FCFA? And I think it's unanimous amongst all the organizations. We can see the confusion. We saw it earlier with the Minister of Canadian Heritage, who doesn't seem to be aware of the file and gives you all of the responsibilities, but you don't even appear in the bill. You have no power under this bill. So are you receptive to ensuring that the first recommendation of the FCFA be incorporated into the bill, and would you accept an amendment? Well, if I can clarify the comments that were made, the issue of a central agency, that is really your question, I think, Mr. Godin. I think, first of all, we have to recognize that we are making the role of Treasury Board tangible to act as that central agency. We've given more power to Treasury Board, like monitoring and verification and evaluation or assessment. The Treasury Board is in Ottawa. I think we have to remember that. The Department of Canadian Heritage, and I am the Minister of Official Languages, it's power given to me by the Prime Minister. I'm not a representative. I am the Minister of Official Languages. But the Minister of Heritage has worked across the country as well. So when we talk about working with stakeholders and know really what's happening on the front lines, clearly the offices of Canadian Heritage are well positioned to ensure that they can work with stakeholders. And if I may, just quickly put a little example, a hockey player. If we're trying to set up a hockey team, would we ask Treasury Board to be the goalie? Maybe, but we wouldn't also ask them to be a winger. So the Treasury Board will play that role and Heritage will do its work. Madam Minister, with all due respect, that doesn't apply as an example. Treasury Board is the Director General, and everything happens on the ice is directly related to that. So what I hear from your comments is that you're open to amendments, but not to the whole bill, and that's the problem. The status quo doesn't ensure that we will protect the French language. That's unfortunately what's going to happen with C-13. Now, Madam, you said earlier that you are the Minister of Official Languages. Can you tell us how it works around the cabinet table? What have you had passed that we see in Bill C-13 around the cabinet table? Do you have the ability to tell us what you have had reflected in this bill? Because when I read it, the Minister of Official Languages has no power. The only time we see your name, Madam Minister, it's because you're the sponsor of the bill. That's the only time. So how can you have the Minister of Official Languages, the Minister of Canadian Heritage, the President of the Treasury Board, who have powers that leave gray zones? And so when we get to the enforcement or the application of the law, things will fall through the cracks. And who will be the victim of that? It will be, in fact, the French language. So what powers do you have around the cabinet table? What have you contributed to Bill C-13? What is the footprint of the Canadian Minister of Official Languages here? Well, my role at the cabinet table, I have a voice like every other minister around the table. My voice is equal to every other voice around the table, first of all. And Bill C-32, yes, was the first version of this, but I tabled the most recent version of the bill with improvements to it. Often, I've been asked today, for example, if our bill is less rigorous. It's quite the contrary. We went further to ensure that our bill would have more teeth. And why did we do that, Mr. Godin? Because of the stakeholders that we heard from across the country who asked us for amendments, to ensure that the Commissioner of Official Languages would have more power, more tools to do his work, and also the immigration policy. We wanted to ensure that it was clear. The issue of positive measures, we want to ensure that there's a better definition of that. So my work, we haven't seen the bill adopted yet, but I hope the committee will work in collaboration with us to improve it. Yes, we heard that several times, Madam Minister, and I want to know did you take the power away from the full power away from Treasury Board? Did you take that out? Because it was in C-32. Mr. Godin, what I will tell you is that Donald Savoy, who's an expert in the area of social policy and public administration, said very clearly during our summit that yes, there should be power given to Treasury Board. At the outset, he thought that Treasury Board would be the central agency, but now, Minister, what I understand is that the FCFA is really on the front lines here. Mr. Godin, what I said is that the two departments in question have their strengths, and I think that we should ensure that we can ensure that the two departments will work closely together. Thank you, Madam Minister. The second question will come from Mr. Drouin. You have the floor for 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Madam Minister. There seems to be a lack of understanding of how this works amongst my colleagues. So with all due respect, could I give an example? The Treasury Board establishes procurement policies, but they don't actually take care of that. It's Public Works that does that. Treasury Board is responsible for the policies, and I think that's the same concept here. We seem to be minimizing the role of Treasury Board, and I think that there have been improvements to parts 4, 5, and 6. And at 46.1, I believe, if my memory serves me well, the Treasury Board has to intervene under C-13, and they must intervene, and in the past it was may intervene. So could you explain the difference between that, what they must do now and what they could have done in the past? Thank you very much. Because of the changes made to the bill, we did make amendments to Part 7, which will oblige Treasury Board to finally take up its responsibilities, and that's important. Once again, I wanted to say to my colleague, we really made the work of Treasury Board tangible to ensure that they have additional responsibilities. We want to ensure that they will have the role of monitoring and assessment and verification. My department, Official Languages and Canadian Heritage, will ensure that we implement these measures. But as I said, Treasury Boards in Ottawa, they don't know the people across the country, and they are here in the heart of the national capital. So for us, Heritage has offices across the country. They work regularly with the stakeholders, and they're working on the Pan-Canadian Action Plan. That is another thing. At Canadian Heritage, we were able to organize these consultations. We heard from 6,500 stakeholders across the country, and it's because of the work we were able to do together. I think, once again, that Heritage will do its work, but also, Treasury Board will do its job. Canadian Heritage will continue to do their job, and we can see that we can promote our two beautiful languages and do it more effectively and efficiently. Thank you. Yes, indeed, it's the importance of positive measures that might be undertaken by the entire government of Canada to support our official language minority communities. Another change that was made in the bill, we were talking about positive measures, some rather than the, and so I don't want to get stuck on the articles in this, but judges explained the differences and why it's important And so now, in the new C-13, you really have talked about the positive measures. So what will happen once C-13 is adopted? What will happen with the definition of positive measures? Well, before the tabling of C-13, we were waiting for the Gascon decision, and we received it, and we wanted to make sure that it aligned with the decision that was made by that judge, and that's exactly what we did. So, yes, it was an issue of positive measures. After the passing of the bill, with the regulatory framework, we want to really define what those positive measures are to make sure that it's very clear. That's exactly what we'll do. This will happen after the passing of the bill. Like you, I want to continue the work that remains to be done. There's a question of that definition, but also what is a strong presence for Francophones outside of Quebec, and that's another regulation and consultation that we have to carry out to ensure that we really very well support and define what that is, a strong Francophone presence. Thank you very much. And it doesn't really in connection with C-13, but the Court Challenges program I myself benefited from. My child was treated in a hospital, and I was able to be served in French because of that program. That program has not always existed. We have reinstated it, but it's important for our communities, our official language minority communities, that be able to use such a program. I want to emphasize that because I could not have been served in French if it hadn't been for that at that point in time. So thank God, Ms. Gisèle Lalonde. The whole issue of bilingual judges, we often discuss this. Our government has appointed many. Why is it important for you to ensure that the issue of bilingual judges be finally resolved through Bill C-13? Well, once again, when we talk about access to justice, we have to ensure that the judges at the highest court in the country will be able to hear these cases without interpretation. It's a fundamental right, and we want to ensure that it be enshrined in a bill, such as in C-13. Since we came to power, all judges appointed to the Supreme Court have been fully bilingual. But also, we want to ensure that it's the case just when we're in power, but in the other powers and the other years, rather, and decades to come, that's the case. We're a bilingual country. The Supreme Court of Canada, the highest court in the country, must have judges who are fully bilingual. They must be able to do their work without the assistance of interpretation. Thank you, Ms. Petitpas. You have 5 seconds left. The next question will come from the second Vice Chair, Mr. Beaulieu. You have the floor for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Madam Minister, for being here to answer our questions today. I've asked some 10 questions of you in the House, and we heard your speech earlier. Nowhere do we see that you are adopting the measures asked for by the government of Quebec. So it's full of good intentions, but nowhere do we see that you're responding to Quebec's demands. Which ones are you thinking of? Thank you for your question. I have more than 30 seconds. I would like to say that this isn't just rhetoric, what we're saying. We absolutely want to do everything to protect French across the country, including in Quebec. So, yes, we understand that French is in decline, and the census that was tabled in August of this year was very clear that we need to do more to protect French. I'm sorry, if you're still coming back with generalities. I asked amongst the Quebec, the things that Quebec is asking for, what are you responding to? Well, first of all, that federally regulated private businesses, with our new legislation, we're going to ensure. That doesn't at all respond to Quebec's demands. That goes right completely against their requests, because they want this to not be a problem in terms of the French language charter in the province. Well, first of all, if I may, Mr. Beaulieu, our new bill it concerns federally regulated private businesses to ensure that employees can work in French and be served in French. Our regime, our system is aligned with Quebec's. We wanted to ensure that there isn't one that's easier than the other. No, that's not the case at all. Bill 101 is intended to make French the language of work, and it promotes more prominent signage in French, and French has to be the common language, whereas your bill is intended to protect French, but also protecting English. So there are sections of the bill, for example, that say that people who don't know how to speak French should be able to continue to work without being able to speak French. So that's not at all a thing that's going to help French in Quebec. Mr. Beaulieu, once again, we have ensured that our system aligns very well with Quebec's because we want to ensure that there won't be something that's easier than the other. No, that's fine. No, all of the stakeholders in Quebec say that we want the French language charter to apply to all businesses in the province. And once again, you're not able to name one single request of the Quebec government that you are in agreement with. Did you receive their amendments? Name one that you have accepted.
First of all, Mr. Beaulieu, we have done several things to assist with the French language in Quebec. Let's look at immigration. We have a problem with immigration in our country, but that's just for Francophone immigration outside of Quebec. We need French immigration in Quebec, and this bill is going to hurt Quebec government with its initiatives to attract Francophone newcomers to Quebec. The positive measures that have been taken to improve, to deal with the decline of French, apply not only to French outside of Quebec, but also Quebec. But no, it's just for English. No, absolutely not. We're talking about it's the Quebec education system that is funded. It's the Mr. We talked about investments for Francophones in Quebec. But let's not forget, we said clearly, if we really want to achieve this substantive equality of both French and English, we recognize that we need to take positive measures so that there's an even playing ground for the French. That's not a positive measure. It's a negative one because it's simply going to strengthen English as an official language. The Court Challenge program, which came in after Bill 101, will it be used to challenge the French language charter, or will it be used exclusively to challenge the French language system in Quebec? This language Court Challenges program is very useful. I know, Mr. Beaulieu, in New Brunswick, this program is very important. And did you know but from what I gather from your answers, there's nothing for Quebec. But you have to give her some. You have 40 seconds. You said that you did a broad consultation. There are two French advocacy organizations that appeared, and they were about the only ones, the only Francophone groups in Quebec. There was one in the Eastern Townships. All of the interventions were in English because of the English lobby groups. That group was the only one who spoke French. We received 6,500 comments either and we received observations either in person or by mail. So there was a lot of equality there. Now we will turn to the final vote. We'll begin with Ms. Ashton. Thank you. I'd like to begin with the question that I put to the Minister of Heritage. He said that you are in a better position to answer these questions. So my question is about coordination. Let's talk about the coordination that Heritage Canada is trying to deal with under C-13. When the Department of Canadian Heritage gives directives to other departments, compelling them to respect official language policies, that the department doesn't succeed in ensuring that you and your colleagues comply with the decisions made by Canadian Heritage. Just thank you, Ms. Ashton, for your question. Once again, I think that with the changes that we're bringing with this new version of the bill, C-13, there will be changes made to Part 7, which will strengthen this aspect. Once again, we want to ensure that the department will take the necessary measures, and with the changes that we make to Part 7, we will see concrete action taken. Unfortunately, what we heard from stakeholders is that we're not going far enough, and our question is, if Canadian Heritage had never been able to fulfill its mission, why would it be able to do so in the future? Clearly, the status quo doesn't work. Why should we continue along the same thing? Along the same path? What will change? I agree with you. The status quo doesn't work. That's why we have taken measures within the Treasury Board to improve the situation. The Treasury Board will have more authority to do monitoring, evaluation, verification, and we give them more responsibilities and the necessary resources to carry out this mandate. We want to ensure that the department and the Treasury Board will receive the funding required to ensure that they will have the individuals needed to do this work once again. And we have to remember that Canadian Heritage has a role to play with stakeholders, and we must play to the strengths of each department with their responsibilities that are well defined. And once again, the Heritage Canada will have a role to play. This whole issue of funding, we know that the community organizations are always applying for funding, and are you, as a minister, are you going to ensure that the funding given to community organizations will take into account the historic demands of these groups? And will you change the funding mode so that you could give substantial funding rather than funding on a piecemeal basis? We have conducted pan-Canadian consultations right across the country, and many times we heard this same issue raised by stakeholders. They talk about increased rent, increased cost of living. They're looking for more. This is the first time that we've improved envelopes for these organizations, and we heard the demands from organizations right across the country. I'm in the process of finalizing our action plan, and over the next few days we will share the What We Heard report, explaining what we heard from these community groups, and this will be included in the next action plan. I would like to ask you, will you be able to give more funding from your department to these community organizations? That's what they have asked us. They've been saying this for months. As a minister, will you be contributing more to the funding of these groups? I said clearly, we appreciate the work that all the stakeholders are doing across the country. They work very hard to protect and promote our two beautiful official languages, particularly in the French communities in minority situations. We're going to give them the tools they need to do the work, and we heard their demands. And as the minister responsible for official languages, we have developed a concrete plan, and we will continue to work with our stakeholders because they do incredible work. You have 30 seconds, Ms. Ashton. Very quickly, the whole issue of education. Minister Rodriguez didn't answer my questions. We lack schools, teachers. What are you going to do to change the situation? Good question. And first of all, in Atlantic Canada, I've often heard from parents who talk about the scarcity, lack of spaces in childcare centers and schools. Our government is investing heavily to address this situation. We have invested $180 million over 3 years to deal with the lack of schools and teachers in French. We have to ensure that we have teachers, obviously. The time you could perhaps elaborate on this later. We will begin a 5-minute round. The first question will be shared by Mr. Généreux and Mr. Viss. So please try and use just 2.5 minutes so that Mr. Viss will have an opportunity. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for coming, Minister. On page 39 on the bill, perhaps your officials can find this. The title is Law on the Use of French in Federally Regulated Private Businesses. And on page 40, after the definition, it says the Minister of Canadian Heritage. Well, this is defined there. And my question is as follows. Under C13, well, does the current order in council cover this? You're talking about delegation of powers? The answer is yes. That answers my question. You heard the question put to your colleague this morning about in Qatar, the fact that the soccer players were not introduced in both languages, as was the case with other countries. You're the Minister for Official Languages. There are 2 official languages. So no one's going to take the blame for this? Maybe the blame will be put on the shoulders of Sports Canada, but you're the minister, and in the bill, you've been given authority. You've given more powers to the Commissioner of Official Languages. If a complaint is filed with respect to an event, is it the government that'll be responsible? Where will the Commissioner of Official Languages point the finger? And this penalty of $25,000, will there be? First of all, I think we have to acknowledge that with respect to official languages is a national system. What happened in Qatar happened internationally, inaudible. But you're responsible for official languages in Canada, and Canada is represented internationally. You're responsible for that? Canadian athletes represent a bilingual country. Why is it that at international events this happens? This is not the first time either. I'm going to turn the floor now over to my colleague, Mr. Viss. 2 minutes, Mr. Viss. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Madame Ministre, notre collègue a déjà mentionné
Our colleague talked about Francophone presence. Are you open to an amendment? Are you going to talk about a threshold with respect to that? Thank you for your question, and thank you for using French. First of all, as for defining what's meant by a strong French presence, this is defined in the regulations. It's part of the Act that is very important. I have lived in an OLMC. I know that for federally regulated businesses, there are regions with strong French presence, like in New Brunswick, where they need to be able to work in French. My second question.
Justice has mentioned that he had very big concerns about Bill 96 in Quebec and spoke at length about his criticisms of the language laws in the province of Quebec. The Prime Minister has recently said that he has stated that he is against the use of the notwithstanding clause in an arbitrary manner. Yet in Section 2 of Bill C-13, it subjects possibly workers and businesses to make a choice to choose a law which has arbitrarily, in the words of the Justice Minister, used the notwithstanding clause. So how can you assure Canadians that they will not be subject to a law that is contrary to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms when it's embedded in this bill right now? Do we need to amend Section 2 of Bill C-13 to make sure that it's charter compliant?
Mais je pense que premièrement qu'on doit reconnaître.
First of all, C-13 touches on a variety of fields, including federally regulated private businesses. As to access to justice, well, we have seen that Minister Lamettie's opinions refer to rights. Thank you, Mr. Viss. You ran out of time. Thank you. Ms. Matenzo, you have 5 minutes.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Petit Pas Taylor amongst us this morning. Thank you for taking the time. My questions are going to be centered around, the first ones at least, around the English-speaking minority community in Quebec. So this community has expressed clearly that Bill C-13 must safeguard their minority language rights. And this has become even more important, as you know, since the enactment of Bill 96 in Quebec since last June. So therefore, Bill C-13, they're requesting that, it does not harm them. And I'd like to have your comments and thoughts on that.
Well, first of all, thank you, Madame Latenzio, for your question and your work on this committee. I've had the opportunity and the privilege of doing cross-country consultations for the official language action plan that's coming up. But also during that course, when I was meeting with minority communities, they also spoke to me a lot about Bill C-13 because we haven't seen the adoption of it. So I want to be, I am very, very sympathetic and aware of the challenges that many Anglophones in Quebec are facing right now with respect to the different regimes that have made law. When it comes to the safeguards, I think that I want to focus again on the comments that have been made by Justice Bastarache when he appeared at the Senate committee. The former Supreme Court Justice indicated that C-13 in no way takes any rights away from Anglophones in Quebec. We are a bilingual country. We want to make sure that we will continue to protect and to promote our official languages and also to make sure that we protect and promote, their rights. And when it comes to the Anglophones in Quebec, we certainly recognize that their rights must be protected, and the federal government will be there.
Okay, thank you. With regards to the federally regulated business, let's devy a bit more into that. So we've heard about the different jurisdictions and the concerns about which laws apply. So since 1996, federally regulated companies have had the option of following Quebec's linguistic regime rather than the federal rules. Does anything change in this regard with Bill C-13? And do federally regulated companies still have a choice of opting for the official languages act or the provincial regime in Quebec? And if so, do you see an issue with this?
Well, first and foremost, as I've indicated, we've made it very clear that we want to make sure that our regime and the Quebec regime are very similar and very much aligned. We wanted to make sure that there wasn't one regime that was easier to opt out than the other. And that's why that we've worked very, very hard to make sure that we were able to make that a reality. At this point in time, with respect to our regime that we have, we've made it very clear that federally regulated institutions in Quebec will have the choice to either opt into our regime or to opt into the provincial Quebec regime. As of now, we are aware that there are several federally regulated agencies or institutions, for the lack of a better word, have decided to opt in to the Quebec regime. But again, it is a choice that they have, that they can choose either ours or the other. The Quebec regime. But again, let me be very clear. We want to make sure that that both regimes are very much aligned because we don't want there to be, differences, that one is easier than the other.
Okay. I'm going to take you back to the course of the summer and your consultations, of which I've participated, and I thank you for having taken the time to do your cross Canada consultations with stakeholders across the country. And I was just wondering, have you had the opportunity to ever since consult other stakeholders in the various minority language community groups to hear more of their thoughts or their amendments on potential amendments on the bill? But more specifically, I will draw your attention to the Court Challenges program, of which I know you're a fan of, and so am I. But again, bringing it back to the context of Quebec with the enactment of Bill 96, do you not see that as a challenge because of this use of the notwithstanding clause? The Court Challenges program would almost be obsolete for the English minority language communities.
Well, we certainly, with respect to your question, I have certainly had the opportunity through the consultations that we've had in Quebec, but more than that as well, I took the opportunity to meet with many Anglophones in Quebec to understand exactly the state of affairs and how they are feeling with respect to Bill 96, Bill C-13, and the rest of it. And I recognize that there's anxiety among Anglophones in Quebec right now because they really do not they don't know exactly what is going to happen with respect to 96 now that it is law. And people are indicating they're paying close attention, especially with respect to their rights to justice and also their rights to access services in health. And I see René here is giving me... I'm sorry, Patricia.
Thank you, Ms. Lattanzio. 2.5 minutes for the second Vice Chair, Mr. Beaulieu. Up until now, you haven't been able to name a single amendment proposed by Quebec that you would accept. Can you name one? Well, first of all, Mr. Beaulieu, we received the correspondence from Ms. Lebel with the proposed amendments. Last week, I also had the opportunity to meet with Mr. Roberge, and once again, I'm very much looking forward to developing a working relationship with Mr. Leberge because we have a shared objective, which is to do everything to protect French in Quebec. Well, if I understand that you can't name a single amendment that you're accepting from the province of Quebec. The Bill 111 that Quebec be responsible for its businesses and that it be able to oblige people to speak French in the workplace. None of that. Can you tell me what positive measure in Quebec under Bill 101, or the Official Languages Act, rather, you might be able to name one or two, but what percentage of those measures strengthen French? Well, first of all, Mr. Beaulieu, I think that when I talked earlier, and I'll come to your question, when you talk about this substantive equality, we recognize that French is the minority language in Canada. That's a period. So to ensure that we can achieve substantive equality, we have to take positive measures, and that's exactly what we're going to do to support the development of the francophonie and for supports for French in Quebec. That's positive measure, Mr. Beaulieu. Well, I looked with public accounts. There's not even 1% of the positive measures that strengthen French in Quebec. So, and it's French that's threatened. So what is C-13 trying to do? To continue this work in Quebec? Well, I agree with you that French is threatened in Canada. And is English threatened in Quebec? The Anglophone community in Quebec, the official language minority community in Quebec. On a national level, the French is the language that's threatened. Well, that is what it means, that the Official Languages Act is helping English in Quebec. Well, if I may please, if we have C-13, we'll have work to do to promote French in Quebec and outside of Quebec. That is a positive measure. That's your time. Sorry, 2 minutes and 36 seconds you had. Everyone's stretched today. Next question, 2.5 minutes to Ms. Ashton. You have the floor. Thank you. We spoke a lot at the committee about language clauses and that they're essential for the survival of Francophone communities. Your government negotiated an agreement with all of the provinces and it has a single language clause, and that is with the BC. We learned that the negotiations were lagging in that province. So what will you do to ensure that the language clause will be respected, that Francophone and Francophile families are waiting for their children to be educated and their young children are going to suffer the consequences? Thanks again, Ms. Ashton. When we talk about substantive equality, what we want to do is achieve that, and if we're going to, we'll have to take adapted measures, and in order to do that, we have to better define what those measures are. And language clauses are definitely a positive measure. With all due respect, Madam Minister, the question is targeting BC and what's happening there. It was specifically on BC. The federal government negotiated an agreement with a language clause, and nothing's happening to make sure that it isn't being enforced. So what are you doing to ensure that that language clause be complied with and that daycare services be funded in French in BC? Well, first of all, ESDC is really looking into that situation to ensure that it's absolutely respected. 1 minute more, Ms. Ashton. Thank you. Well, unfortunately, what we're hearing from the witnesses is that it's not respected. We're not seeing any results. And to say that this reflects very badly on the entire federal government at this point in time. The other issue is that, or rather on the funding, will you show leadership, more leadership, and use the power, spending power of the federal government to work against the decline of French in institutions, now that you recognize that French is in decline? Well, I think that if we look at the last action plan that we tabled, which is finally going to be wrapped up soon, we are investing in institutions. If we want to support the vitality of official language minority communities, we absolutely have to make investments in institutions, and that's exactly what we did. So I'm looking forward to tabling the next action plan, and I see that René is not happy with me. Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Ms. Ashton. We have maybe 2 3-minute questions for Mr. Généreux to start. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the positive measures at the federal level, there's a whole series of actions that are provided for in the new legislation, and I imagine that some of these are cut and pasted from the first version. On page 12, it says to help organizations and associations and other organizations to reflect the bilingual character of Canada to other nations. Now, I was talking about what happened in Qatar earlier. Do you believe, and I hope it was the case earlier on as well, to ensure that what happens internationally is that we will promote French? Well, that's why it's important to pass C-13, because from that we'll have legislation that we actually will be able to use with an action plan. So I hope we'll be able to work closely to have it passed as quickly as possible. At the beginning of your question, you mentioned the positive measures. Part of the bill is not a copy of the previous version. We worked hard on redefining those positive measures. The Canadian commitment for all institutions through federal departments is to promote French as much as English internationally. This isn't a new thing in the bill here. It's something that existed before. So perhaps it's a little bit different in this bill, but obviously it was part of the Canadian government's commitment to promote the 2 languages across the country, but internationally as well. So it's not the first time that we've seen this kind of event, and it will probably happen again. So what will be the consequences under the new legislation compared to the commitments of each of the departments who are promoting both official languages? Well, once again, I want to reiterate that when we talk about positive measures, that Bill C-13 is different from C-32. I want to say that. And secondly, with our new legislation, non-governmental organizations are mentioned in the new version as such, and that is new. We want to ensure with the passage of this bill, that we'll be able to continue to do the necessary work. And there's a lot of work to do, regulations to be drafted, and we all look forward to being able to continue this very important work. You're talking about assessment, and isn't that Treasury Board that's responsible for that? Is your department going to ensure that these things are done and put in place, or will it be Treasury Board? It's absolutely Treasury Board. So my fear, Madam Minister, is that there are components, as there have been in the last few years, that this will fall in the cracks, and nobody will be responsible for it. In fact, it's already started. Canadian Heritage says it's your responsibility, and no, thank you, Mr. Généreux, because we're looking at the clock. I want everyone to have the same opportunity, so I'm going to give the opportunity to Mr. Serré to wind up with the last 3 minutes. Mr. Serré, you have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much, Madam Minister, for your very hard work, the work that you've done all across the country. During the consultations, we clearly heard from Francophones across the country the concerns that they had with most of the provinces, the concerns that they had in terms of protection of the French language with the provinces. So they were asking for language clauses, and they see us at the federal level as the savior of French in Canada, because sometimes the provinces don't play their role. But I'll give you the opportunity, if you could, to add to that and talk to us about your conversations with the provinces and how we can enrich that conversation and support the provinces, how we can work together to ensure that C-13 will apply across the country and that we work with the provinces.
Thank you, Mr. Serré. Thank you. If I may, I just want to make a brief comment to finish my answer. If ever there's a complaint, an international complaint, often the Commissioner of Official Languages asks to do this inquiry. If the Commissioner decides that it's a complaint that comes under his purview, or he could decide that it comes under my purview. So we will now have additional tools that will be given to the Commissioner, and we will ensure that the Commissioner can do his work to protect our two beautiful languages. Working with the provinces and territories, Mr. Serré, it's important that we have close collaboration with them. During my first meeting with the provinces and territories, it was very important that we understand that we all have roles to play. Your question about the linguistic clauses and positive measures, once again, if we want to attain substantive equality, we have to ensure that all federal government decisions will be seen through an official language lens. Particularly with respect to all MCs, we have to ensure that we work with the provinces and territories to understand the impact. We have to play a leadership role, and that's exactly what we intend to do, so that we can finally evaluate what the requirements are, and we will take measures to mitigate if required. Thank you. There is no time, Ben. Before we conclude, I would like to thank the Minister and her team for appearing. To conclude, I'd like to remind you that tomorrow at 11 o'clock, 11 o'clock is the deadline for proposed amendments. The clerk advised us, has provided us with the new coordinates for the legal analyst. I think you received these coordinates 2 days ago in your email. So I'd just like to remind you, 11 o'clock tomorrow, it's the deadline for getting your amendments in. So we'll be meeting on December 13th. Mr. Vice, go ahead.
Je suis en train de
I'm in the process of drafting some amendments. I need a little bit more time. Can I table them Monday? No, that'll be too late. You're probably making a joke. But we've been listening to the witnesses. There's still a lot of work that remains to be done. And especially with my colleagues in British Columbia. That was a unanimous motion. That being said, we will now adjourn the meeting.